It is time once again for the Scramble Podcast alongside my podcast broadcast partner, three-time Heck Crichton Award winner and Canadian Football Hall of Fame inductee Chris Flynn. He's in beautiful Long Lake, Quebec. I'm Paul Hollingsworth at the CTV studios here in Halifax. First of all, Chris, happy belated holidays to you and to everyone watching. Happy New Year to everybody. I
You too.
apologize in advance. I have a bit of a cold, so if I sound a little stuffy, we'll make the best of it for the next few minutes here. But bottom line, I hope your holiday season was great, and I hope everybody had a lovely Christmas break.
Yes, Happy New Year to you too, Paul. It's been great spending time with the family and my son Nate and haven't been able to see my daughter Chelsea and Evan and Millie over the holidays yet, but hoping to visit them soon too. So yeah, it's been nice holidays, but almost over already.
Yeah, this is the I don't want to say the gloomy part of the year. I have a lot of blessings in my life, so rather than be gloomy when I know I should be happy, I'm going to focus on the happiness. But the excitement, the anticipation for Christmas, and then when you wake up on January 2nd and there's a long stretch of winter ahead of us, it's a little hard on the soul at times. But we're going to stay optimistic and happy and talk some sports. So let's focus on the NFL. I have my notes here to make sure I have them right. I have most of this memorized, but the Bills are 13-3. KC's 15-1 in the NFC. I believe Philadelphia is, 13-3 for Philadelphia. Detroit and Minnesota both 14-2 in the NFC. So top heavy are the NFL standings. Some interesting storylines when it comes to teams, fighting for those playoff spots down the stretch. Heading into this week of action, how do you size up what's happening?
Well, I'll mention you mentioned January, gloomy January. A lot of people don't like January, but January is NFL playoffs, so that's what one that's one great thing about the month of January. And yeah, last weekend of the regular season, and yeah, on the AFC, you've heard me mention on this show a few times about I like Joe Burrow, and I like Cincinnati Bengals, and kind of never count them out, kind of thing. Here they are. They were 4-8. Now they're 8-8. They still have a chance. It's a slim chance. They need to beat Pittsburgh. They need Denver to lose to Kansas City, and then they need Miami to lose to the Jets. So they need both those teams to lose and then beat Pittsburgh. So their chances are still slim, but kind of hoping for Cincinnati to make it, and they would be scary in the playoffs with Joe Burrow. So that's definitely keeping an eye on that. And then on the NFC, the only playoff spot I think still available is Atlanta trying to overtake Tampa Bay for that's the NFC South. So Atlanta would need to beat Carolina, and they need Tampa Bay to lose to the Saints. The other big game is for the number one seed Minnesota against Detroit. And what's crazy is whoever loses drops all the way down to the number 5 seed with 14 wins. It's kind of crazy. That's how the division winners get 1, 2, 3, and 4. They would drop to 5. So whoever wins gets number 1. Whoever loses goes all the way to 5. So it's not a playoff game, but it's almost like a playoff game. So that's a huge game on Sunday night, I think, Minnesota at Detroit.
I don't like the term inevitable in sports because the best part of sports is the lack of predictability. We're in an era where, like we were with Tom Brady and the Patriots, every year it felt inevitable. There was this inevitability that they were going to win the Super Bowl again. I have that feeling with the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, Detroit has impressed me, and I'm not a Lions fan, but growing up and watching that franchise struggle for so long, it'd be a great story to see them do well. There are other positive stories. I think Joe Burrow is a compelling character. To quote Dwayne Johnson, it's not talking smack if you can back it up. He's got a bit of swagger to him. He has the cigars going on. He dresses fancily going to the stadium each week. There's something innately likable about him. But I watch Kansas City and I just have a feeling that until proven wrong, they're going to win another Super Bowl. Am I wrong on that? Does it feel tilted their way just a little bit?
It's funny. Everybody was not critical of them, but all year long they kept winning ugly, but they kept winning. But people were kind of dismissing them a bit because they actually could have lost a few times. They were lucky, but then all of a sudden, the last few weeks, they've gotten on a roll, and now they're winning and winning easily. So now everyone really feels like, oh, the Chiefs, they're getting ready they know when to get ready at the right time of year. Who would you put money on if you're betting your house? Absolutely Kansas City. But there's so much parity now. There's so many good teams and teams that people complain about mediocrity because everyone's beating everyone. But to me, it's just parity. The teams are good. It's hard to win. So what Kansas City is doing is actually amazing, and going for a third Super Bowl. You start with their quarterback and their head coach, but their defense gets underrated too. Their defense is really good too. So for sure, they are the favorite. Absolutely. Could someone like Buffalo or Baltimore upset them in the playoffs? Absolutely, that could happen too. So it's again, it's an exciting time of year. These next few weeks coming up.
And a quick note on Buffalo before we pivot to the World Juniors. I'm a big stadium guy. I love sports infrastructure. In most towns I go to, I'll go find the stadiums and the arenas just to see what they're like. I've been following very closely the building of the new stadium in Buffalo. It's not domed, so the snow is going to fall and impact the stadium. But I'm excited. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but their current facility has a lot of character. It's a big part of their history, but I'm excited to see that new facility open up next year and have them play in a beautiful new building.
Yes, so am I, and yeah, it would be exciting too. I think a lot of people will miss the old stadium for sure. But if I had a team I was going for, oh my God, it would definitely be Buffalo. They went to 4 Super Bowls and lost. They've never won. Obviously, Detroit too would be, as we mentioned a few podcasts ago. Detroit, Buffalo, what a great Super Bowl that would be. But my number one team, I guess I would be going for and cheering for this year is Buffalo. And I'm a Josh Allen fan too. I like his humility. He's quite humble. I like, what he says, when he's getting interviewed. So I'm a Josh Allen fan too. And they'd be the team I'm going for this year. And as you mentioned, with the new stadium, everything, yeah, for sure, they should never get a dome. Minnesota should have never got a dome stadium once upon a time. That's a home field advantage that they lost, and Buffalo has that. So, yeah, definitely be watching Buffalo closely over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's exciting to see them do well. And again, I won't say I'm a Bills fan per se, but they're an easy team. I have teams like the St. Louis Blues in hockey.
Mhm.
I just keep my eye on them and have always kind of liked them. So Buffalo, it's nice to see them do well. And if I had one team that I could circle to do well this year and be pleased, it would be Buffalo. All right, let's pivot to the World Juniors. Great time of the year for international hockey. Canada was competing at the Spengler Cup. They get eliminated in the semifinal a couple days ago. World Juniors happening in Ottawa. Some of the games downtown at the football stadium, the rink next to the football stadium.
Mhm.
The other games are happening out of Canada. Canada loses. Well, they've lost a couple of games in interesting fashion, but the most recent one losing to the U.S. And U.S. beating them rather convincingly. It's panic time for Canadian fans and fans of Canadian hockey. This team, we always expect them to do well. They're a bunch of kids. They're not out of it yet, but it's not been a real thrilling ride so far.
No, it hasn't, but I'm a little almost not surprised, but how harsh and critical everyone is. And it's because everyone expects them to win, to win every game. And if they do lose a game, maybe, like in overtime or something. But last night's game against the US and the undisciplined play and their inability to score goals. So everyone's already counting them out. But all I'm going to say is don't count them out because they got embarrassed last night. And it's almost like they're in it by themselves. The fans are against them a little bit, or a lot of the fans are. So all I'm saying is don't count them out yet. They have to play Czechia, I think, in the quarterfinals, a team that's eliminated them in the recent past. So I'm just saying don't count them out yet. It definitely hasn't been a great round robin for them, but now the playoffs start. So let's see what happens in the quarterfinals.
I would agree with that. We've seen over the previous histories of this tournament, Canada up against the wall, and when they have home ice advantage, it gives them a huge advantage. I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think heading to last night, their shooting percentage as a team was less than 6%, like at or around 5.5%. That's not going to cut it. I mean, you need to be in double digits at minimum. So they're not scoring enough goals. And we're used to talking about Canadian hockey teams at the World Juniors having this high end, elite, high scoring talent. So that is something new. And you mentioned the undisciplined play. Third period against Team USA, I think the score was still 2-1. It was a close game at that point, and Easton Cowan gets a boarding penalty, hits the guy from behind. You can't make that penalty. I mean, he's just a kid. I don't want to be hard on him. But if 2 or 3 of those hits don't happen in that game is right there for them to win. If they clean that up and just improve their shooting percentage just a little bit, I'm with you. I don't think it's a big bridge too far for us to imagine them doing well. But what a flip of a script from 2 years ago when that tournament was here. Connor Bedard came to Halifax with the World Junior team. It was a tidal wave of enthusiasm, and you could feel the whole tournament, even in the close games, they were going to win. This is a team facing adversity. Perhaps that adversity, as you pointed out, could be the X factor that pushes them with their backs to the wall past that finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. And teams have not been scoring against them 5-on-5. I think it's almost been all power plays that they've been scoring against them. So if Canada can stay out of the penalty box, that's going to improve their chances greatly. And yeah, it's their offense. Everyone's used to Canada being able to score goals, and it's crazy how they're not able to. But I think the first thing they have to clean up is their undisciplined play, the penalties. Again, no one's really been scoring on them 5-on-5. So if they can stay out of the penalty box and maybe even get that first goal in the next game, that can really turn things around for them.
Yeah, playing with the lead, especially for players in a tournament like that, in an elimination game, is so key. Let's talk a bit of NHL. Eastern Conference first. The Leafs are tied for first with Florida in the Atlantic. They've been doing well all season long. I think they're ranked 7th, 8th, 9th, thereabouts, depending on each day with the standings. So they've had a good start, and they've overcome some injuries. Tampa Bay is in the first wild card spot. They're a plus 37 as a hockey team. The Leafs, for example, are a plus 12. I just look at what's happening in the Atlantic. We'll get to Ottawa and Montreal in a second. I look at Toronto and Florida fighting it out for first place. Ottawa's hanging around. Boston's hanging around. But Tampa Bay, the way they play and the way they look and the way they've retooled a little bit for the last year, that's a team to me that looks scary dangerous as the season progresses. When you look at the East, what do you see?
Well, absolutely, Tampa Bay. I mean, they're getting older, but they still have that Stanley Cup winning pedigree. So I would not ever count Tampa Bay out. And Toronto's always in the mix in the regular season, and I expect them to do well. I think, yeah, like I said, they're fighting for first place. Boston got off to a bad start, but are coming on. And kind of like talking about football and parity in football. Oh my God, there's so much parity in hockey as well. Like Ottawa, there was so much doom and gloom with the Senators a month ago, but now, as you mentioned, they're in the last or the second wild card spot. So yeah, the Ottawa's doing well, and Toronto, they're always kind of doing well and in the mix. It's really for Toronto. Leafs fans don't even care about the regular season. It's like, what are you guys going to do in the playoffs?
Yeah, we'll have to. My observation before we get to Ottawa and Montreal, my observation on Toronto is I don't think this is a team this year that will go deep in the playoffs. I have a variety of reasons for that. However, it's only January and teams retool at the trade deadline. So if they add some center depth, if they add a scoring piece for that bottom six, if they add to that bottom three of their defense, I mean, the top end pieces are there. And if Austin Matthews can get healthy, they could be a dangerous team in the playoffs. But we'll have to see. Now, Ottawa gets off to a tough start. They get red hot in the month of December. As you mentioned, they're holding down the second wildcard spot. The Montreal Canadiens were done. I think they were 31st at one point in November. They've won 7 of their last 10. They won 3 in a row. They lost a tough game to Columbus right before the Christmas break. They probably should have won that game. Then they won 3 in a row. They go into Florida. They beat the Florida Panthers. They go into Tampa and they beat the Lightning. They go into Vegas and come back from a 2-0 deficit to beat Vegas. Now they're 3 points out of a playoff spot, and they have games in hand on 2 of the 3 teams ahead of them. It's unbelievable. You mentioned parity. There's Montreal with nothing to play for. They are 1 or 2 wins. I mean, they're in the mix, but they are 1 or 2 wins away from being in a playoff spot. And they're getting better in a hurry right in front of us. Do I think they're going to make the playoffs this year? No, I don't. Do I think they're going to be a very good team in 2 years? Yes, I do. I think they're going to be wicked good with lots of young depth. But not to sell them short, on the one hand, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year. However, young teams tend to break through at surprising times. So maybe we're seeing them break through. I think it's a nice midseason hot streak for them. But the bottom line is we're seeing that young talent that Montreal has, that Philadelphia has, that Ottawa has, start to percolate a little bit. Rangers are disappointing us. Buffalo and Detroit, their rebuilds seem to have stalled. But I think there's a lot of optimism for Ottawa, Montreal, and Philadelphia and Columbus in that Eastern Conference as they start to climb the standings.
Yeah, even Pittsburgh, they were
Yeah.
counting Pittsburgh out at the beginning of the year. They got off to a terrible start, and even Pittsburgh has kind of climbed back, and they're right in the mix there for the second wild card spot. One thing I'll mention about the Leafs, one thing that maybe will help them this year, maybe not, is they have a coach now who recently won a Stanley Cup. You mentioned St. Louis Blues earlier, so he won it with St. Louis in 2019. So we'll see if he can make a difference for Toronto going into the playoffs. But as far as Montreal, Ottawa, I would say right now, in my mind, there's no way those two teams are going to make the playoffs. You know, you always think of the teams that are in it, like Tampa Bay and Florida. That in Toronto, they're always in it every year. But Florida, in a way, came out of nowhere a couple of years ago, and now they're a perennial team. So maybe Ottawa and Montreal are close. It doesn't take much. There's a fine line between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. So it's exciting to see Montreal and Ottawa in there in the mix for the wild card. And I wouldn't count either team out if they get hot. And they got both have good coaches, and goaltending, of course, is what it all comes down to as well in the playoffs. So yeah, it'll be exciting to watch two great teams in Montreal and Ottawa down the stretch here. And I say down the stretch, they got probably about halfway through the season here. But yeah, it's going to be, I think they both have a good chance of making the playoffs for sure.
I'll give you a baseball analogy when I'm looking at Ottawa and Montreal. All things come back to the Expos with me. In 1991, the Montreal Expos finished last place in the NL East. In 1992, they got off to a 17-20 start. They fired Pete Reynolds, their manager, and hired Felipe Alou. The second half of the season, they go on a run. They win 87 games. They finished in second place. Nobody ever thought they were going to win the pennant. But you saw this young team come of age and start to climb the ladder. And then in 1993, when they won 95 games, I think, or 96 games, I think, then in 94, they had the best record in baseball. You saw that young team come of age. I think Ottawa and Montreal and Philadelphia, too, to use the comparison to what I'm talking about with baseball, they can miss the playoffs this year, but still have a very successful year because if they finish strong and they finish competitively, that tends to, as a momentum bounce, carry a team into the next year if they stay healthy and add a couple of pieces. So it'll be fun to watch them, not just down the stretch this season, but how it trends into the next season. Let's go out west for a second before we wrap up. Yeah, Edmonton trying to get back to the Stanley Cup final again. Winnipeg Jets just quietly being a dominating force. Really good to see. Again, there's a team that I just kind of like. I'm not a Jets fan, but I find them impossible to cheer against. They're young. They have some veteran depth sprinkled in. They're winning games. It's an exciting time to be a Jets fan, and it's an exciting time to be a Canadian fan watching this Canadian team do well.
Yeah, Winnipeg, did they win their first, was it 15 in a row?
I
think to
believe it
start the
was, yeah.
season?
I think
And
they're
then they
like 15
cooled,
and 1 or something at one point. It's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, then they cooled right off. They
Yeah.
were kind of in a rut. Then they got hot again. Now they're the number one team in the NHL right now, and it's impressive to see. A lot of people wouldn't even know a lot of the players on Winnipeg's team. So Winnipeg's number one. Edmonton, I think, is in the third spot in the other division, and then you have I think Calgary, the second wild card spot, and then Vancouver 1 point behind them. So Edmonton, again, they always seem to get off to a slow start every year, as they did last year. Then they came on really hot. Now they're slow start again this year. They're coming on, and yeah, same thing. Calgary and Vancouver are playing well enough. They're kind of like Montreal, Ottawa. They're in the mix at
Yeah.
least. So all the Canadian teams are either in the playoffs or in the playoff picture for the last wild card spot. So yeah, it's good to see all the Canadian teams doing well right now.
Yeah, it's probably too much to ask, too much of a New Year's wish to have all Canadian teams make the playoffs. But it is exciting to see even the teams that aren't doing well are doing better than they were before, which gives us all something to cheer for. So I'll tell you what, why don't we park it there? We've covered the World Juniors, we've covered the NFL, we've covered the NHL. When the next time we speak, the Canadians will have a better idea about how Team Canada has done or is doing at the World Juniors. And of course, we'll start to see those NFL football races further congeal. So we will wrap it up there for our first edition of the Scramble Podcast for 2025. For Chris Flynn in Long Lake, Quebec, I'm Paul Hollingsworth. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.